Hello, this is episode 17 of Audiovisual Cultures. I'm your host, Paula Blair. In this edition, Andrew, Shail and I discuss Sofia Coppola's Somewhere. A rudimentary website is up and running and can be found at audiovisualcultures.wordpress.com. If you can support the development of the podcast and website, please make a monthly pledge to Patreon where you can find more information. For now, enjoy our discussion on Somewhere.
To see if there's anything in production at the moment, even in pre-production, and according to Internet Movies database,
She might be writing something. They're pretty stretched out. Her films, and she only had one out last year, so it's a bit soon.
It's an average of one every 4 years, I think, 3 to 4 years. So and she had one out in 2017. So let's give her
a minute. Working on something. So probably maybe in a year or 2 or 3 we return. It's a couple. Yeah. But for now, it's just the last of the 6. Yeah.
So let's just recap what we've done in our Coppola jaunt. It's not a season. Has been Lost in Translation, Beguiled, Virgin Suicides, Marie Antoinette, Bling Ring, and Somewhere. Even though that means that we've actually done them in the following order, if chronologically they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we've actually done them 2, 6, 1, 3, 5, 4. But this is how I have been loaned them by my student. That's the only reason we've done them in that order.
I think it's been useful seeing them out of sync, if you like.
The whole principle of there being unity to a director's output, even if that's unity deriving from their frequent collaboration with the same people, is that you should be able to watch them out of order and not notice significant differences between them.
I think this one being, so this is 2013, this one?
This one's 2010.
2010, even earlier. This one is aged by the technologies in it, by the phones being used, by the Wii, by Guitar Hero.
Was it Guitar Hero? Because I thought it was called Rockstar.
I think anyway, Rockstar was singing one. Guitar Hero was with the guitars that they had, and there was, I think it must have been Band Hero when it was the full ensemble. Yeah. It was Guitar Hero.
So Guitar Hero is a game for the Wii, isn't it? Where your controller is an entire guitar.
It's a guitar, yeah.
Right,
and then they were playing Wii Tennis, which I had memories of because my sister has a Wii, and we used to play that on it.
But that was the only thing that really aged it.
Yeah, other than that, it was contemporary period fairly broadly, vaguely 21st century as we know it.
I would love, because this is the nature of my being, to make my handful of nerdy observations about form early on.
So do you want to have a rampage and then we'll come back and just have a normal discussion?
Well, it may not be quite extensive because I can rattle through these quite quickly. The first is Coppola, she's a big fan of long duration shots.
Yes, there was a lot of long takes. There were a lot of static shots this time, but movement when it was used was fairly subtle.
There were, I think, at least 3 slow forward dollies, and then there was one outward dolly which derived meaning from being a rare shot type in this film. She knows her repertoire, she knows the toolkit available to her when it comes to camera movement. There was the usual, and I'd call this a Coppola thing, a Coppola signature trait, having long moments of not having any diegetic or non-diegetic music, and then abruptly having some either diegetic or non-diegetic music cut in. That plays all the way through, and then we have another 15-20 minutes of no music of any kind. So that there are these spots of noise, spots where we listen to an entire track. As well as, in this particular film, quite a subtle insistence that Johnny's not actually a film actor. That's not his profession. He's just kind of fallen into being a Hollywood star. The thing he's actually good at is music.
And he seems to be specifically an action star, or at least that's the film that's being promoted. And you just talk about him doing his stunt work in his new film that he's just done. He seems to be action specifically, which is interesting given that Stephen Dorff is playing him. And he's had a really wide variety of roles, and he's not the kind of star that he's portraying in this film.
Now, on camera movement, particularly the use of camera movement to engineer what is and is not on-screen space. Very early on in the film, there were 2 scenes where there was long duration, locked off shots. The first was the very first shot of the film, which is just him driving around a racetrack, such that he's driving into and out of off-screen space repeatedly.
Yes, he's moving in an anti-clockwise motion.
Oh, I like how observant you are.
And on screen he's going from left to right, but then from right to left as he leaves again, and is circling around that way. And everything's in the bottom half of the screen. I actually thought what you would call the positive space the negative space being the overcast sky. The positive space was more like the bottom 3/8 of the screen, I thought. It's not quite half, but it was more than a third.
This is the kind of opening shot that goes, I think you might find that I consider intricately my composition. And I think you'll find that you're going to trust that I'm going to do this for the rest of the film, viewer.
And it's quite symbolic. I mean, even if it's meaningless and fairly empty, because I think there's a lot of things in the film that I noticed there's a lot of banality in the film is focused on, and in this it was quite a banal thing, racing around this track in this black sports car. There's a lot of emphasis on the Foley sound all the way through the film, but particularly when that car is being driven, this is really loud, heavy purr of that engine, and the revs are really hard, and it breaks down and things, so it seems like he's really raking the crap out of it. But that idea of driving around circles but also driving in an anti-clockwise motion, there's a sense of going backwards.
And that's the consistent motif throughout the film with that car, isn't it? This thing is a symptom of the way he's got his life set up so that he's going nowhere and indeed preventing himself from growing as a person. One other nerd observation is that very first shot, which was over a minute long. I'd like to pretend that I actually counted how long it was, but I'll do that next time. Then there was a slightly later shot just within the first few minutes where he's got these pair of, they might be twins, they look like twins, but they're just also just very similar looking people, so they might not be twins. Pole dancing for him in his hotel room using these little portable poles. And when they're doing it, the camera's locked off so that when they do stuff low down on the poles, they're out of the shot. I am perhaps a little bit obsessed with how funny things are when they move into and out of the bottom of the shot. On-screen, off-screen space, which is something to do with the floor, I think it just seems to be completely hilarious for me. Other people look at me rather bemused when I point this out. But in this one, there was several shots of them doing kind of twirly pole stuff. And they'd come out the shot so that it was perhaps just the bottom half of their legs sticking up into the shot. And I found that really funny. In both these shots, the camera's going, well, I could reframe to observe you, but no. And then, when Johnny Marco, who's our main character, played by Stephen Dorff, when he's watching his daughter Cleo ice skating, and this is Elle Fanning, and she's very good at ice skating.
Excellent,
When he's watching her doing that, the camera notably and conspicuously reframes to keep her in the shot as she's moving fast.
And it's intercut with him watching her, as are the times when the pole dancers are in his hotel room.
And that similarity of editing patterns makes it a bit creepy.
I don't know, though, when I was watching him, his face acting is really just so fascinating in the film, because I was getting the sense when he was watching the pole dancers, he looks at them in a very similar way as he's watching his daughter ice skating, but also in the way that he's watching the guy who plays guitar for them and sings to them when they arrive back in LA after being in Italy. He seems to appreciate performance and talented performers. I don't get that he's looking at the pole dancers in a fully sexualized, objectifying way. He's actually looking at them working hard doing that dance.
Well, that's the thing that I was going to point out, is that the editing pattern is similar, but other aspects are dissimilar. There's two times when he's watching the pole dancers, and I think you're referring to the second time, when he's quite amused by what they're doing. He's like, this is really quite creative stuff. But the first time
he's falling asleep.
He's falling asleep, so that's slightly different from how he's watching Cleo when she's ice skating, because he's quite into it. He's like, oh, this is talented stuff.
He sort of has an awakening there, because he had no idea she'd even be going ice skating. We find this out when he's dropping her back to her mum's, and they have a conversation, and he asks her, and she says, I've been doing it for 3 years, and she's got all the kit, she's got the dress, she's got the boots, everything. And I did note down that it's a really long take that's watching her. It's unbroken, and it really is a very young Elle Fanning really doing all that dancing, and she is really very good.
Another dissimilarity, as I've said, is the fact that it will reframe. I think also, actually no, can't be sure, the pole dancers have got diegetic music and she's got non-diegetic music at that point, but
no, they both have diegetic.
Oh, of course, yeah, because she's dancing.
Because it's playing, and it's just the space is different, because that's why the camera can move. In the hotel room, they're in this quite small enclosed space. It hasn't got anywhere to go, and he's lying on the bed, so he's not moving, he's just lying there static. And maybe it's reflective, the cut off of them when they're on the floor. He's lying on the bed, so he can't see the floor, so it's subjective to him. Whereas when they're in the ice rink, they've got this huge big cavernous space, and he's able to sit up and crane around and watch her and move with her and that sort of thing. The camera's subjective to him.
I can definitely see why my student wanted to write about different classifications of space in each of these films, because there are some strict demarcations which are, this particular type of space is oppressive, this particular type of space is liberatory. It almost always seems to have something to do with young femininity, which is being oppressed or liberated by these different classifications of space. The tiny swimming pool that they have access, they have a private swimming pool in the hotel in Italy, and Cleo's swimming up and down in it, but she can do like
lengths,
she does like one stroke per length.
It also would be good to look into the songs that go with these things, because that first pole dance is happening too, and you see it when they're packing up. They're folding up the poles. They've got this tiny little boom box with them, and they were doing that first one to Hero by the Foo Fighters. And this is not a particularly sexy song, and the content is, it's not about any kind of sexual or romantic relationship. It's about a guy that everybody looks up to. So it's setting up, actually, it's more about his character, that he's playing the hero. Johnny isn't playing the hero, but Johnny, as an actor in the movies, he is playing hero characters, it seems.
We can reasonably expect to find this with every single one of these diegetic and non-diegetic movie choices, is that it has a minor narrator function. It's commenting on character relationships.
Most of the women in his life were thin, white, with long blonde hair. I mean, this is just getting overly predictable now in Coppola's films.
There's also a trademark shot in Coppola's films, which is the women in their pants shot. Particularly with the pole dancers, and then with Cleo skating. We got to see a lot of the pole dancers' pants, and the way they were showing us pants was through kind of leg scissoring acrobatics.
And then bum jiggles and things.
Is that called twerking?
Maybe, I don't really know. I just call it as it looks.
Yeah, that's a much more appropriate name for it.
I'll say it rather than you say it. It's more appropriate if I say it, probably.
But then with Cleo's ice skating, we've got more women in their pants thing, but that's just a kind of normal part of how you ice skate, is that you wear this complete diaphanous little skirt and you're basically in a leotard.
It's the outfit, it's the uniform. But they're in a kind of uniform as well. It's in those dresses, it's in those outfits, those costumes. Probably more appropriate are the pastel colours.
Yeah, absolutely. I wasn't going, this is a really pastel film, but actually there's lots
just
of pastel elements to it.
And what people are wearing. So the first pole dance, they're wearing these tiny pink sort of dresses, and the underwear, I would say probably coral, I'm guessing.
Okay.
I wasn't really looking that closely. And the really tanned body. And Cleo's ice skating outfit was a very pale blue with the usual sparkles and things.
Thinking about the pole dancers as being just kind of grown-up versions of his own daughter. One of them, because they are presumably both of them shagging Johnny.
It seems to be.
It's quite subtle.
One of them gets annoyed because he calls her the wrong name. He can't tell them apart.
And then when
he keeps getting names wrong because all of the women he sleeps with look exactly the same. He can't tell them apart.
And then he comes back into his room very late on in the film and finds that both of the women are in his bed. And I think one of them's got a nurse's hat on and they're topless. And he goes, no, now's not a good time because he's got Cleo with him. And by that point he's seemingly done a bit of learning about the more appropriate way to relate to women.
And it's interesting how much is unsaid, because there's a lot of non-verbal communication between him and Cleo when they're in Italy and he's going to a big film do and he's at an awards show where he wins something and he doesn't really, you were saying, it's a bit lost in translation, Bill Murray, where he hasn't really got much of a clue what's going on, but he's there nonetheless.
The bit with the dancers appearing behind.
That was bizarre, with no warning, and he didn't know what was happening. And he, all the way through the film, he looks really shabby. And there's all these women throwing themselves at him, and that's just become normal for him because he's this big actor, but he looks so shabby and they're so preened and primped. There's this woman who's really angry with him and takes him off to the side and says, did you think you'd never see me again? And all this. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to be that same woman comes to the hotel room during the night.
Yeah.
And they, so he and Cleo have had a little bonding moment where they haven't been able to sleep, and so they get gelato in and they're watching Friends dubbed in Italian, and it's quite a funny, cute little bonding moment. It's a really nice scene. But then she has a sugar crash, falls asleep, he's still lying awake, and then there's a knock at the door and it's this woman. And then the next morning she's in a dressing gown, she's on the phone to people, she's talking to Cleo as if she has entitlement to do that. She's also asking Cleo, how old are you? 11. Do you have a boyfriend? And this 11-year-old is going, in her head, you can see her thinking, of course not, I'm 11.
It's fantastic eye acting. From
Incredible. He eventually arrives in and she's steaming mad but saying nothing. She's just the way she's looking at him, and he's like, oh, I'm in trouble. You know, there's a lot of eye and facial acting going on. There's a lot of gesture. So much communication through gesture going on.
This is one of the 2 films out of the 6 which was an original script written by Sofia Coppola, because the others are either they're based on real stories or they're adaptations, or is there any that she didn't actually have a hand in writing? Anyway, there's the only ones that are original stories. And the other one is Lost in Translation. And that has a very similar scene where Bill Murray's character, whose name is...
Bob.
Okay, right. Bob seems to have his eye on a singer at the hotel, and then quite late on in the film they actually meet at the bar and spend a night together. And then Charlotte comes to Bob's room in the morning and he hears the singer singing inside his room, and she's, I think she even sees her as well. And that was very similar to that scene with Cleo being abruptly confronted with this adult woman in her
inner space,
in a space when that space has been established between a young woman and an older man.
Yeah.
Although, of course, in Lost in Translation, it's a potentially romantic relationship between the young woman and the older man. It does actually seem to be primarily one of him becoming more responsible.
Yeah.
In Lost in Translation, Bob becoming more responsible, which has shades of parental relationship. So it's very similar things happening there. The film's fantastic at making its implied viewer feel really uncomfortable about Johnny having any of these relationships with women his own age. As if it's going, no, you've got a daughter, you're not allowed to do this. But actually it's going, I think you've got into the wrong habit about how to interact with women. You were mentioning there's a lot said by silence. I'd love to see the scripts for these films, because...
Yeah, how do you communicate that somebody's steaming mad at someone?
There's the principle of, in a script, if it's 1 page on the script, it's 2 minutes of screen time, assuming that people are talking to each other.
Yeah.
Whereas in a couple of films, there's these vast swathes of people not talking to each other.
There's that, and also when people do talk, it's calm, it's quiet, there's no histrionics. It's always delivered in a very calm, deadpan way.
And even at what we might call the film's climax, where Johnny, and spoilers of course, I think he just calls his, what seems to be his semi-permanent partner who lives nearby, the one who he keeps dropping in on, and we hear very little about it. He phones her up and he just says, I'm nothing, doesn't he? The line's quite muted.
I think it was,
He says, I'm effing nothing. Even at that moment, he's crying, he's upset, but it's not that big, shouty...
No, it's...
Oh, everyone needs to be feeling something really intensely right now. Bit of acting.
And even when Cleo, it has to be said, is an incredible character. She is so capable, organised. Not only is she a great ice dancer and she aces Guitar Hero, she is a great cook. You see her making really accomplished meals.
And he, by contrast, doesn't.
Can't, yeah. He makes very sloppy, basic meals that aren't particularly healthy. She makes really elaborate, complicated things, and she makes it look really easy and seems to enjoy it, and she just does it. She just phones up and orders the stuff in to make things, and she just does it. There's no, how did I do this, Dad? There's none of that. When they're having breakfast, she has the laptop out and she's saying, I'm making a list of all the things I have and what I need for camp, and she's organising everything.
At one point I wrote, is Cleo this film's Coppola girl? And yes, she is. And the Coppola girl has certain characteristics, and one of them is that sense of competence.
Yeah, very independent, very able.
The second is that she's in her teens.
Well, she's 11, so she's pre-teen.
There's a discuss around whether 11 and 12 count as teen.
Tween, isn't it?
Well, if we say...
I mean, she's a very mature 11-year-old.
If we say I was born in the teens, as in, you know, you and I were...
Well, the tens,
I was
you
born
would
in the
say.
70s, you were born in the 80s. Would someone say they were born in the tens or in the teens?
If you were in the teens, it would be 1917. If you were born in the tens, it would be 1912. Well, that's how I would do it, but I can't speak for all of humanity.
Alright, so the Coppola girl is a girl who is older than 10.
But she's still a child, she's still girl, she's still in girlhood.
Yeah, and girlhood includes quite a lot of years, because Charlotte in Lost in Translation is the girl of the film,
Charlotte
and she's well into her 20s.
There's girlness to her. There's not fully womanness, but I think that's partly because she's being played by Scarlett Johansson, who was only 19, playing a 24, 25-year-old.
The wrong way around.
I mean, Elle Fanning, I don't know, maybe you're going to look it up, what her actual age was when she was filming this. But she looks about the right age. She doesn't look any older than 13, certainly. But who knows?
Few calculations.
I'm not very good at telling the ages of small people.
She was born in April 1998.
So she would have been about 11 or 12 when this was filmed.
Yeah.
When in 2010 did it come out?
Just check release dates. It seems like it was a...
Because it was maybe made in the summer months of 2009.
Came out at the Venice Film Festival in September 2010, and it seems general release the last couple of months of 2010. Filmed at the latest during the summer of 2010, and so she was almost exactly the same age as her kind.
Yeah.
She's the Coppola girl in several respects, one of which is that she's not self-conscious.
No, she's no reason to be. She's very confident. She does get called pretty and beautiful and things like that all the time. But there seems to be a respect. I noticed that the guy who seems to be her uncle, Johnny's brother, seems only to be there when she's there. He's never around when Johnny's on his own.
Isn't there a bit with a party?
There's a party, yeah, but he's not on his own.
Oh, of course.
That's just unexplained. That's just as it is.
I may have one more nerdy observation. Harris Savides. You know how we noticed on...
Yeah, I wrote him down actually.
Yeah.
The DP, Director of Photography.
Because we noticed on The Bling Ring, it was dedicated to him, and it was
Yeah.
his last film, and he'd been responsible for a decision to have one of the shots where the Bling Ring ransacks a house be shot from quite some distance away, in extreme long shot, and it's just lots of
It's an
the glass
incredible
back
shot.
of this house. And I noticed that bit where Johnny, he's being driven home after the press junket, and he says to the driver, "Can we make a quick stop just round the corner?"
Yeah, it's similar.
The driver says fine. The camera stays outside, still showing the car with the driver in it, waiting for Johnny
The
to come
lights
out.
on, yeah.
You can see in through the big window, and you can see Johnny. He goes in, and it's his girlfriend's
Well,
flat.
I don't know. It was coming across to me that this was a regular person that he has. And I wouldn't say they had a romantic relationship. Just a regular person. Because he has lots of other people
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah.
the whole time eyeing him up. It was getting quite comedic the way women were eyeing him up, and there was a little bit of that with Bob in Lost in Translation. The question of who he is comes up quite a lot. There's this identity crisis going on because he doesn't have a self. He's this actor guy. He's just Johnny Marco, and even that name is very anonymous. It's just a kind of generic actory name, and there's no sort of personality behind who that could be. It's just the idea of Johnny Marco, the Hollywood actor who does these big blockbuster action movies, and so these women know who he is and they're attractive, so he'll go with them.
On these main characters, I did think at one point, is this a staunch critique of stardom? Because the film seems to be very much into people doing what they're good at, and very much against people being famous for being famous. And what we have with Johnny is him, you know, he'll be woken up by his agent phoning him and saying, "This car's outside waiting to take you to this thing." He's not planning his day,
No,
he's just doing what
it's all done
he's
for him.
going where he's directed by his
He
agent.
does what he's told. There's a bit at the party where there's this really young aspiring actor stops him and tries to ask him a few questions, some advice. He asks Johnny if he studied acting, and he said, no, I just got an agent, did auditions, started getting parts, keep at it, you'll be fine, and just walks off and doesn't care. It's all very vacuous. It's like you said earlier, it just seems to be something he fell into by accident. He didn't seem to be really trying that hard to do it. He's just become this guy, and it doesn't seem to have been what he really wanted to do, but it has given him this access to all these things in life.
According to the logic of the film, the reason why he's so constantly badgered to do junkets and to do, he goes to Italy for a premiere, doesn't he?
A premiere, and there's an award show.
Yeah, so he's become a production value. He's become
Yeah.
a thing that's important to an industry. Regardless of whether, at the time when the film takes place, he's working at all, regardless of whether he still has the skills for which he initially became that production value. And the film's quite strident that he doesn't have those skills anymore. If he ever had them, maybe there was a lot of blagging. He's not a worker in a cultural market for the whole of this film. Even the bit where he's doing a photo shoot with his co-star in the film that he shot some time before. There's the job of acting like they're friends.
Yeah.
Can't even do that.
That was a telling scene where the wide shots show that he's been standing on a block to be slightly taller than her.
Yeah, that's a nod at quite a lot of major Hollywood male stars. not actually as tall as we
It's
think.
not
they
a
are.
huge block, it's only a couple of 2-3 inches, but it's there and he's standing on it, and it shows you him standing on it with her beside him, and
Yeah, it's subtly done as well.
reveals and I find it fascinating, the scene where he has to go and do the prosthetic makeup trial, where he gets this whole head put in plaster.
This is a Coppola thing, I think, where she just likes to have unusual things happen for real in front of the camera and just watch them.
Let it reveal itself. There is a slight tipping over into documentary, because you said when it was playing, when it reveals what it is they've been doing, and it's actually been a prosthetic makeup trial to make him look like an old man, so it must be for his next role, and it seemed like a real reveal.
Yeah, they flipped him around so we could see the mirror, presumably after hours of him being in makeup and prosthetics. I thought that's Stephen Dorff going, wow, you've made me look really old, rather than Johnny
acting
Marco
necessary.
going, wow, you've made me look really old. There was just a tiny glimmer there of, I can see why he might be a valuable worker in this cultural industry, and it's that while they could get somebody who's actually that old to play the role, only somebody who's young and fit would have the stamina to actually work in a, say, like a 8-12 week shoot for a film. Someone who's that old just wouldn't be able to.
Or it maybe suggests that it could be a time travel thing, or the film will skip in time in some way, because that's where we've seen that before.
That was the smallest glimmer of some indication that he might have skills that were needed for this market.
Yeah.
Because apart from that, this is a guy who wants to be doing music.
It seems like these are the interim moments, these are the banal between moments of that way of life, of that industry, where you're doing promotion for one film that was filmed a year or two ago, and you've forgotten that you've fallen out with your co-star because you've pissed her off, probably because you fell asleep halfway through having sex with her, like he does a couple of times with some other people in the film. It's like a critique of the vacuousness of this way of life, and nothing's really real. Even if there's moments of real life in it, you can't get enough of an attachment on him, because he's not part of his daughter's life enough, and they both know that. They both come to realise that, and he apologises for that in a way that's really silly, because he's got a helicopter behind him and she can't hear what he's saying to her.
In so much as stardom is the practice of using a person as a production value, because it doesn't include some sort of mechanism for realising when a person has stopped being a production value, that could be seen as a bug in a system of making culture, which otherwise is maybe okay as far as Coppola's concerned, but she seems to think, isn't it okay for someone to just stop being a star? And both Bob in Lost in Translation and Johnny in Somewhere seem to be liberated by those moments of anonymity.
They are normal guys swept up in this strange way of life, and I'd noted down that this world of celebrity, it's all about the image, what you look like, and that's all anybody sees is that persona of the Hollywood actor Johnny Marco, and he's really just living a life of what you're supposed to do when you are that persona, that surface image of a person, and not the real actual guy. There's just no attachment, and then that's where the identity crisis comes, because there's nothing to root onto, and he's not even, like, he's living in hotel rooms, he's got no home, he's got no place of his own, he's transient, he's stagnant and transient at the same time.
And unlike Lost in Translation, the hotel is not a place of discovery and adventure. The hotel is... It's quite cloying, and it's banal.
It gets quite boring, actually, seeing these women just sitting around with no top on.
I think the fourth pair of boobs that we saw in this film was the point where I went, we're supposed to have demystified these by this point, and so's Johnny. And Johnny appeared to, that pair of boobs number 4, appeared to go, those are unremarkable.
Well, that's the thing, because there's that really odd moment of he's out on the phone, his agent has phoned him telling him about the Italy trip he has to take, and he's just looking around, and on the balcony below there's a woman who's been sunbathing in a bikini, and she looks up, she sees who it is, and she undoes the bikini top and basically flashes him, and he kind of just turns around and walks away. It's like, these women are telling him in a lot of different ways, I am sexually available to you simply because of who you are. I'm not sexually available to all men. I'm sexually available to you because you're a big Hollywood star with no personality, so I just want to have slept with you because of what you are rather than who you are as a person, or that I even find you that attractive, because he's really shabby looking. He's never clean shaven. He's been beaten up. He's got his wrist in a cast for most of the film.
And that impedes his ability to do quite a few things.
He's got bruises on his face. He looks like he's been beaten up. He says that he's doing some stunt that's gone wrong, that kind of thing. And he's
Although
got
it
injured.
actually was just that he fell down some stairs.
It just fell down some stairs because he's actually pretty gormless. And then I started to think about consent. There's women who are just really wanting to have sex with him. And it was interesting because there's one where at the party he just says hello to someone and then the next thing they're in bed. She's really getting into it and he keeps repeating, kiss me, kiss me. And that made me think, well, he seems to be wanting some kind of affection. Not necessarily the sexual gratification, but he really wants to be kissed. He really wants affection rather than sex. They're getting down to things and he goes to go down on her and then pretty much immediately falls asleep.
I did for a moment go, oh, he's dead. Because there's no way someone could fall asleep
dead.
that quickly.
Yeah.
He's clearly just died.
But he's
but no,
passed out. He hasn't necessarily fallen asleep, but he's passed out because he's been drinking very heavily and he's also on medication for pain and things like that.
The arc of this film is he learns to rise above all that stuff because of his developing relationship with Cleo. And it's the developing relationship with Cleo which prompts him at the end to go, I don't think I'm going to be famous anymore. And he just walks away from not just his career, but seemingly all of his possessions.
All the possessions, exactly.
Including the car.
Yeah.
He's just a guy walking down a highway with his
The
clothes.
shirt in his
That's
back,
it.
yeah.
At that point.
Into the sun.
If the film had ended a couple of seconds earlier, and if the film had not ended with that really upbeat, non-diegetic music in the last few seconds, my assumption would have been he's gone off to kill himself. Because the music that happened before that was quite urgent and quite scary.
Yeah, whereas that was quite upbeat. It was quite a nice song and he's smiling.
Yeah.
And that was the thing, is that the camera doesn't just watch him walk away. It comes round to the front of him and is looking at everything he's leaving behind. The car bleeping because he's left the key in the ignition. So he has no need for this car that looks really fancy but sounds like an old wreck and runs like an old wreck. It's not a good car.
You
And
can
he
do a
hasn't-
lot with Foley sound, can't you?
The Foley sounds incredible. I meant to write down who the sound designer was and I just missed the name. So much of the start of the film is so quiet that the slightest sound becomes really amplified and really meaningful. And there's so much non-talking between Johnny and Cleo, but so much communication going on. They have a really sweet game of table tennis. They're just in their bare feet. They're having really nice little volleys. It's really sweet. And it just actually reminded me of your daughters, the way you all play in the garden in your bare feet. It was just normal. It was a family thing.
I even, during my recent trip to go and spend a bit of time with family in Wales, had a bonding game of table tennis with my little brother.
Exactly.
I've done nothing with for well over a decade.
Exactly.
So table tennis, very important part of bonding in all narrative.
And they do lots of really nice things together. There's even a moment where he says, do you want to stay another day before I take you to camp? And she says yes. Her mum has decided, it seems, to just dump her.
The mum story.
Yeah.
I was really expecting it to become a big thing where he would have to go and find what had happened to her mum, even though they're ex-partners, because something quite serious seemed to have happened to her mum. Maybe her mum had killed herself.
I think you're looking too much into this. This film was fairly short, it's just over 90 minutes, and it was about those almost dead, boring moments in life between things.
Well, that's it. I'm in the habit of going, I want to find out about big picture and causality.
Yeah, but
that's not how
that's not what
Coppola
this
works.
is about. This is about the tiny things that will inform you. I was hearing her voice on the phone being very vague and saying that, can you just make sure she gets to camp on this date? I just need time. It seems like this person is going through some mental health issues. We have very little about her. We don't know whether they were married or not before, or if they'd been in a loving relationship or not before. We don't know if she'd been one of his conquests who got pregnant, or they'd actually had a meaningful relationship. It seems that they probably did, but he's a womanizer, so it's not going to work out. But Cleo in the car, we were saying earlier, but he very quietly breaks down. That's quite soon after she has very quietly broken down in the car, and he just notices that she's been silently crying beside him and comforts her, and he doesn't say very much. All he really says is don't cry, and it's not very effective. But then starts to do fun things with her. He seems to have actions rather than words with her. I got the sense of that.
What happens after that is they end up in Las Vegas and
Uh-huh.
he's shooting craps in a casino.
Yeah.
And she has to stand one step away from from the table because she's young. That seemed to be an actual thing that an actual, a croupier has to tell you to do, and actually told Elle Fanning to do. There's all this suddenly being in the same room as real people doing their real jobs.
Yeah.
Elements in this. The scene with Benicio del Toro.
Yeah, that was so strange.
It was like he just popped to come and visit Sofia Coppola on set one day.
And
she went,
maybe
hey.
for 2 minutes.
Yeah. Well, let's just improvise a scene. We need you for 10 seconds. That's it. So there's just a tiny conversation in the lift and that's it. And I don't even know whether he's supposed to be himself either. Or
it was really ambiguous and it was so quick. It was over and then he never came back.
Question I think I want to apply to all these films, because I have a hunch that I might be right, is that Sofia Coppola never shows people having consensual, enjoyable sex to completion. Because either it's not consensual, it's not enjoyable, or it's not completed. Because there are several instances in this of, you said that there's a bit where Johnny just passes out. Then there's another one where he's having sex with the person who lives across the hall from him in the hotel, but it's happening off screen, so it's not actually being shown. You just hear a bit of dialogue and a headboard going up and down. You know, when we watched Wars, I was uncomfortable about the fact that Spielberg had made all the French people and German people speak English to each other. So presumably we were hearing them speak French, but magically hearing it in English, rather than having subtitling. And just as infuriating is during Saving Private Ryan, there's no subtitling. All the characters speak in their native languages, but there's no subtitling. So both are really jarring. And then there was several moments when they were in Italy, somewhere, where characters were speaking Italian and no subtitling again. There was quite a lot of Italian dialogue, and we're being put into the point of view of Johnny experiencing that.
We're aligned with him and Cleo because they don't understand the Italian and we're with them, and you just get a few bits and pieces, and then some of the Italian characters and people doing cameos as well, because a lot of those were real personalities, were saying little things or tiny translations enough for him to have understood what's going on. So the person interviewing him on the spot for TV and on the stage at the awards show, there's this big spiel in Italian about who he is and calling him up, and the Italian agent, it seems the guy organising and sort of in charge of everything and his trip there, taps him on the shoulder to let him know you're going up when they say your name. They're going to say your name really soon. And she hands him the mic and says, the stage is yours, in English. They do bits like that because they have to communicate with him.
In general, the real people who Johnny interacts with are really nice. So there's a guy whose job it is to take care of his car, it seems. He's really nice. The people who staff the hotel that they run off to in Italy, the more local hotel, all really nice people. There's a lot of contrast between characters who have quite a serious character deficiency and busy people around them who, in spite of being busy, are just generally nice and do things for them. When they jump into somebody else's chauffeur-driven car outside the swanky hotel in Italy, the driver goes, oh no, you're in the wrong car. And then the driver goes, oh, it's you. For you, Johnny, I'll take you anyway.
Yeah.
There's just helping going on. There was a moment when I think both of us got a sense that this was nodding to The Graduate. For me, it was during the underwater bit. Not just the fact that there was underwater filming, but it was underwater filming in a swimming pool on a very bright day. So the water seems to be kind of glowing with all this refracted light. And then characters enter the shot from above. They jump into the swimming pool, and there's a moment of, I'm not sure what I'm seeing, there's bubbles and there's limbs and everything, and then they're looking more or less straight into the camera. And there's bits of that midway through The Graduate.
Converse to The Graduate, they have a really lovely bonding moment again in the pub because they're doing a pretend tea party. And it's really funny and sweet.
This, we realise one day we are doing it.
I can't go under the water. I can't have my face submerged in the wind. And it was really sweet and funny. It seemed like Stephen Dorff and Elle Fanning as actors must have had a really lovely rapport. It was coming through, at least, that they did.
Well, there's one scene where it's an empty shot initially of a hotel corridor, and then we hear giggling coming from off-screen space.
It's really nice.
And then he runs into the shot and he's got her over his shoulder.
Yeah.
And there was moments where I was going,
I know, her head
he's
nearly hit
he's
the
going to
wall
smack
about
her head
4
against
times.
that bit of wall there. But no, it was all quite capably done, and you have to be quite trusting to do that.
Yeah, it was a really funny bit as well. It was very sweet.
And the thing that really redeems Johnny is his capacity to have a relationship with Cleo, which insulates her from all of these other versions of femininity, these adult versions of femininity that are quite sexually charged. It's his ability to respect the fact that for a good at least 6 or 7 years yet, she's not going to be that kind of person. And so, the carrying her down the corridor where there's giggling and playing is one of the warm parts of this film. That's the way in which this character develops. There's There's a bit where Cleo is describing a novel about a vampire not being able to be with a non-vampire.
I've never read it or seen the films, so I'm pretty sure it was Twilight.
It was one of those moments where I thought, is that a blatant bit of, hey, this is a teen and teens are different from kids and grown-ups. In fact, they're kind of like aliens. Because I didn't think that Sofia Coppola did blatant versions of that. But I suppose, actually thinking about it, she does do blatant versions of that.
But that was a big novel at the time. I mean, if this was 2010, I remember people reading it then. And not the target audience, but people who were older than that and reading it and then really enjoying it. It was out around that time and becoming big. There's also possibly a very slight nod to Stephen Dorff's character in Blade. Wasn't it the first Blade?
Yes. He's the head of the younger vampires.
Yeah.
His generation of vampires is very teen and very grunge. And they're taken over from the older vampires.
Because there's something a bit Kiefer Sutherland in Lost Boys about Stephen Dorff. And how he looks, I find.
Quite pale.
The shape of his face and things. I think he's a very subtle actor. I really like him. He's had such range. He's really impressive as Candy Darling in I Shot Andy Warhol. It's funny him going from a trans character in that, and then this guy Johnny who's quite hyper masculinized as a persona. You've got him freaking out when the masseur comes. The agency hasn't told him how this guy works and that his regular person would be coming, and that he's getting this man coming, and that this guy works naked. Naked women doesn't bat an eyelid. Naked guy can't handle it.
It was one of those little self-contained episodic set pieces. This is the thing about Coppola's films is, okay, we're going to have this thing happen to this character now, and then that's going to show us something, or it's going to slightly develop the character, it's going to slightly change the character. But then the causality that sets up, or the causality that brings it about, that's now over, and we're now going to have another thing that happens to that character a couple of days later. And will accrue change, rather than having a solid chain of change, will accrue information about a character. And it does give Coppola's films a sense of temporal ease, I suppose is the best way to put it. It doesn't lack something, it doesn't do that temporal urgency that comes from, okay, now we've got the causality from scene A has gone into scene B, and now it's changed because of these events, and that same chain of causality carries on to scene C. It's much looser than that.
Well, it's sort of building up a little bit more of the picture about this guy, because the central question is, who is Johnny Marco? Because that's one of the questions he's asked at the press junket that he has to go to, and he can't answer that question. He doesn't know. So he's a guy who doesn't like that, or at least doesn't like that being sprung on him. And there's a lot of things that are sprung on him. Again, there's no histrionics. He's just like, look, I'm sorry man, I'm not into this. Thanks for coming out here anyway, but I'm not doing this. It's all very amicable, actually. There's no drama. It's just, no, I'm not happy with this, so stop now. And the guy stops and he leaves and it's fine. It's been a lack of communication that has been not the fault of theirs.
Having watched a film scored by John Williams recently, if John Williams was given that scene to score, there would be trumpets, there would be violins galore, there would be these kind of sweeping, emotive, melodramatic hints about how we're supposed to feel at certain points, whereas Coppola just goes, no, I'm not going to do that. I might play you a bit of music in about 10 minutes time, but for the moment you're going to have this play out in a single shot, and I'm just going to let the acting do the work.
I thought the music was really restrained in this film, and it is used a lot, but compared to the others it's a lot more restrained. In the Bling Ring it has to be there, and it has to be almost constant, because the gang are almost constantly listening to music. In Marie Antoinette, she's almost constantly partying. The contemporary music that's being played is telling a lot of the narrative in terms of mood. But here it was the Foley sound, I think, was really doing a lot of the grunt work in this film.
It wouldn't be accurate to conclude that she uses sound very little.
Oh, it's used it a lot.
Yeah, it's that she uses sound in a way where the effectiveness of it, well, the capacity of it to mean, is heightened by the fact that for the past 5 minutes you've been hearing sound.
Even just parts where there's the very slow dolly in on Johnny when he's getting the plaster work done around his head, and all you can hear is him breathing and just the very tiny ambient sounds in the workshop around The really tiny, just dead air, the white noise of life. It's a quiet workshop. There's nobody else around. They've just left him sitting there and he's breathing. So that's all he can do in that moment is breathe, because it actually shows when they're completing the surround around his head, 'cause his whole head is covered and he's just got these holes at his nostrils. All he can do is sit still and breathe. And the sound is really focusing on that breathing, and his head's centrally framed. I mean, his nostrils are pretty much dead centre of the whole frame.
I've written in my notes, is this meta cinema? Because we talked about the disaster artist, probably counting within that subgenre. Or indeed genre. In some way, we're not getting what it's like behind the scenes of filming a film or preparing for a film or editing a film. This is just what it's like to be someone who works in that profession. But we'd see some blobs of the work involved, and the work of sitting there and having your head moulded is something which Coppola seems rather interested in depicting. She seems to want to go, okay, I'm going to show you a couple of things about what it's like to work in this industry. One will be that your agent's constantly on at you. Another will be doing junkets with people you haven't seen for a year. And another one's going to be just being very patient while people poke around at your head.
Yeah, it's very physical, and there's a lot of sort of non-consensual touching that you have to be okay with. Even at the press conference, he and the actress, they're having to kind of hug in and smile and touch each other, and they're not happy about that. She particularly is not happy about that, but they have to do their job, and they have to, and she's better at acting happy about it than he is.
Yeah.
He just looks perpetually confused. And I think it's a really delicate balance to get, actually, is that I'm pretending to be happy with this, but I'm not happy with this kind of look on your face.
You have to do
And
that.
he does it
you have to
really
do it with your
incredibly
eyes.
well.
You have to be slightly acty with your eyes.
Yeah.
Slightly happy, but not really happy with your eyes. We're talking about the tiniest little differences with how tight the corners of your eyes are.
Before we forget, because I think this is something that underpins the film and it's really subtle and it's easily forgotten about, is the text messages he keeps getting from the anonymous number that insult him. And they insult him usually, I think, through a question posed to him. It's, you think you're hot shot, don't you? Stuff like that. And they're really passive aggressive, almost stalkery. There are times when he thinks he's been followed.
They seem even to be texts from somebody who can see what he's doing.
It does seem that way, yeah.
They come at moments when he's just done something.
Yeah.
And of course, this is something that Coppola is probably taking pride in by this point in her career. No explanation.
Nothing ever happens with this. And he doesn't even really seem to react. He gets the text, he looks at it, you see what it is, he puts the phone down, forgets about it until the next time it happens, just looks a bit amused and then forgets about it. But there's obviously this internal build-up of stuff going on. He doesn't really know who he is. Is he the sort of person who... Maybe he thinks he's doing something differently, or that he's doing what he's supposed to do in LA. If you're a famous actor, you're supposed to act like you think you are something. But interestingly, I don't think he does think he is something, because he's so peripheral and alone in very public places. He's at the party, which seems to be in his own place. He's kind of mulling around and he's peripheral, he's in the background, he's saying somebody will come over to get something and he'll say hello and they won't stop to talk to him, they'll just move off very quickly. Then he'll just make a beeline for someone he's probably never met before but has been looking at him, and then immediately they'll be in bed together. And again, it's nothing to do with him as a person, it's to do with him as an icon.
I've been listening a lot to the God Awful Movies podcast, and the three guys who do that together, No Illusions, Heath Enright and Eli Bosnick, they have this constant comedy routine about how when they go to atheist events, and apparently they're all three of them recently at the American Atheists annual convention in Oklahoma City, that apparently women just throw themselves at the three of them, even though, as they constantly joke in the podcasts, none of the three of them are at all easy on the eye, that they're a lot better as audio. I used to think, oh, that's just gags, but actually I can believe that.
There's something about celebrity, or even if it's minor celebrity,
where you just lose your ability to make important distinctions in that situation. Another stylistic thing, Coppola is quite comfortable keeping her cameras out of people's faces.
Yeah.
She'll do a dolly in, but...
Doesn't get too close.
Yeah, even with those slow inward creeps, doesn't get too close, or doesn't get intimate. The majority of the shots are no closer than medium long shots. The long shot seems to be a bit of a standard. There are, of course, several ways of making distinctions about things that are further than long shots, so the very long shot or the extreme long shot. She's fine with that as well. Let's say if we take the ping pong, the table tennis scene, if you were to take the same action and film it to really concentrate on the interaction between the two characters, you'd film it in a simple shot, counter shot pattern where you're shooting each of the two actors in something like medium shot, maybe even medium close. Sofia Coppola, one camera, filming not quite from the side, but
at an angle, sort of from one of the corners, but back quite a bit.
So it's in long shot.
You can see everything, and they're doing it for real. They're actually volleying.
And they seem to be improvising as well.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult to tell what is improvised dialogue and what is not, but I think it's one of those places where you can trust your instincts.
But they've probably built up a rapport, and she's been able to say, just play a game, and just be fairly natural with your dialogue. Just remember your roles with each other, and that's that.
Don't call him Stephen.
Yeah. She doesn't really seem to call him anything. Does she call him Dad?
No.
At any point? I don't think she does. And I think he only ever uses her name. And he's got her name tattooed on one of his arms. Nice. He's got quite a few tattoos. I tried to have a look at what some of them are. One of them said made in the USA. There was another one that was a bird in flight, and I thought it looked a bit like an eagle with stars. So I thought there was maybe an American hero thing going on. The all-American hero. Again, it's this sort of mythical character that doesn't really have a personality. It's just a stock character type, really, which seems to be the sort of roles that he plays as an actor has fallen into playing. There was a moment when they pass a car crash, and it seems like it's a one car accident. It's very brief as they're passing it, and it seems to be a sports car is driven into a wall. My
instinct was the handbrake cable just snapped on that car, and it just rolled down a hill and into a wall without a driver in it. It seemed like they were just walking into work that morning on filming this, and someone went, "Hey, there's been a car accident outside," and Sofia Coppola went, "Okay, right, everyone get in the car, we're using that. It's going to be a random thing that our characters notice on the way out."
It's just there is quite a history of films that feature car crashes in some way or another, but I think it's a big thing in Jean-Luc Godard's early films. There's a lot of car crashes in his early films. There's a lot of characters passing the aftermath of a crash or getting into crashes, that sort of thing. The image took me back to those for a moment, like his Weekend, and I think it's even in A Bout de Souffle, Breathless, there's a part where Michel is quite nonchalant around an accident and people are just gawping at it. Something really violent has happened and people are just gawping at it. This to be looked at thing.
Thinking about filmic predecessors, a film in which a character very early on gets an injury and then spends most of the rest of the film with a conspicuous piece of dressing for that injury. The one that kept coming to mind was Chinatown.
Oh, right, yes.
But there are others, aren't there?
I was thinking when Cleo was introduced by writing on her dad's cast, and it's cut in an interesting way. You have the second time with the pole dancers, and one of them's really annoyed with him and goes off, and the other one goes up to him and kisses him and pops her bubble gum, and then there's an implication in that sex happens, and so it cuts to black, and then the next thing a woman's hand is writing on the cast, and you think it's the next morning and this woman's writing on his cast, and then the reveal is that it's Cleo. It's this little girl, and it's Cleo because she's written her own little drawing in her name. That wakes her dad up. That made me think of Grace Kelly in Rear Window.
Oh, yeah.
Because she is the first to write on Jeffrey's cast. She writes, "Here lie the broken bones of," I think it's J.B. Jeffries. I think actually you see that on his cast, and Lisa's reveal later in the film is something similar. There's part of her before there's a reveal that it's Grace Kelly playing this woman.
That was one of those shots that made me think, when it's finally revealed that it's Cleo and not one of these two pole dancers he seems to be having a relationship with. That was one of those shots that made me think that there's a deliberate attempt here to try and make the viewer feel uncomfortable about regarding women as sexual beings, because they all at some point were an 11-year-old girl. Is the film just going, you just got to remember that women are humans because, hey look, they were all kids once? Or is it doing something else? Is it maybe trying to say there's adulthood in kids? So maybe is it doing something very different, nearly opposite to that? It's worth a rewatch of her entire corpus to try and establish
that. Cleo is very adult in that she is so capable. I mean, she's more capable than her parents in many ways. And you think, well, are kids of her age more capable? And then we lose capability as we age. because we become train wrecks.
That's maybe the model for Coppola's output, is that
Or
it's when one is mid-teen that one is at one's sharpest.
she's not mid-teen, she's early teens.
Well, I mean, that's one.
11 is not mid-teen.
I didn't say it was. Looking at her entire output, there's implication that she's going to develop, she's going to get better, she's going to become an even more capable person as she moves further on into her teens. And so looking at all the other Coppola girls, average them all out, the age for these girls seems to be mid-teen.
There does seem to be a sense that she has maybe had to become that capable because her parents are not capable.
One thing that struck me as the implicit criticism of all adults is drinking. There doesn't seem to be any positive drinking that occurs.
It's all drinking to get absolutely smashed out of your head.
Looking at all of the films of Coppola's that we've seen the past couple of months, Lost in Translation, drinking is associated with empty rhetoric. Marie Antoinette, there is some teen rebellion drinking. So, drinking for teenagers, investigating it for the first time, that's okay. Bling Ring, it's associated with criminality.
Yeah, there's a lot more drugs that go with the drinking there.
Yeah. Drinking by adults in these films is not a good thing. Teenagers seem to be more attuned to the benefits of drinking alcohol, which constitutes a bit of a rebellion against the parent culture.
I was thinking actually with other potential very subtle film references, when he's getting the head mould done, it was making me think about the Invisible Man with his head wrapped up the way it is. And then again the questions over his identity. He's quite anonymous in many ways. Johnny Marco, two male first names, as a full name in a way, and it's like Max Power kind of action hero name. It's quite generic. There's probably connotations with other Hollywood Johnnies, action heroes, where the name just kind of trips off the tongue.
When I was a teenager, I quite pretentiously planned the pseudonym I would use if I became a published author, as of course is the norm when one is a teenager and thinks so confidently of one's abilities. I've never used it, and I never will, so I'm happy to share it. I was going to call myself Edward Andrews. It's one of those things that says, this isn't a real name, because it's two first names, slightly retooled to make it look like an actual surname. Same thing about Johnny Marco, is it has that smack of... It's probably, even in the story space, it might not even be his real name, because it's very common for stars to work their entire career under pseudonyms.
His name could even be Markowitz or something like that, and it's very common for people who become actors who are descended from migrants to anglify, Americanify the name.
Eric Banner is the big example of that, because Banner is actually short for Banadinovich. And there was a small implication that might have been what Johnny had done, because the film he was doing a junket for seems to be about Latin American characters. And he was asked about how the film represented Latin American characters, and he just seemed to blank that question.
You got the sense that he turns up and he does the lines and then he goes. Again, the young aspiring actor was asking what kind of process he uses. Does he use the method? And he was saying, what you mean method acting? Yeah, I mean that. No, I don't do any of that stuff. He wasn't giving anything away, but there was a sense that he was telling the truth, that he just doesn't really do any preparation. He just turns up, he says the lines, he goes. And I think a lot of actors do that. If they're part of the machine, they don't need to be thespians. They turn up, they say what they need to say on the day. Somebody's probably feeding them the lines from the sidelines. When they just turn up, they do it, they go.
Wasn't it Lev Kuleshov who wrote that whoever you put in front of a camera to make a fiction film should not be an actor? It should be something like he called them marionettes. Oh no, he called them actor mannequins, perhaps? Anyway, whatever term he used, the implication was what you really want to put in front of a camera when you're making a fiction film is something that's as close to an automaton as possible, that will just move their hand from down here to up there at this particular speed, at this particular time. You just want to cast people according to their given physical qualities, like height and shoulder width, for example, how they walk, that kind of thing. You don't cast people for things that they can do if they put some effort into it. You don't want to cast people for their ability to pretend. And there is a lengthy history of people in film at least being popularly deemed to become film stars just because of some characteristics that they were born with, rather than anything they can bring about through the effort of acting, and rather than the ability to learn the skill of acting. So that might be exactly what we just got in somewhere. It might be Sofia Coppola going, at least in this industry, one does not need to be able to act. One just needs to be able to do exactly as one is told at any given moment, regardless of whether that is actually true. Because it seems that amongst the assortment of the A-list stars, you've got a bunch of people who do seem to play themselves. There's a whole debate there about whether the person they're playing is actually themselves in these films, because maybe the themselves that we see outside of the films is itself performed. But alongside that cadre of actors who seem to be playing themselves, there's another cadre of actors who pride themselves on range. The variety of roles they play definitely indicates that acting is something they have some ability at least.
I thought it was interesting how Cleo always has a Sudoku book.
Tiny details.
She's used to being left on her own, whether it's by her mother or her father. She's always prepared to occupy herself. I thought it was a really nice touch, because she pulls that out when they've not long arrived at the hotel in Italy, and the woman who's angry with Johnny pulls him off to the side.
This is another Coppola characteristic, is a detailed mise-en-scène.
Again, it shows you an 11-year-old doing Sudoku, and this is at the time when it has just exploded as a globally popular phenomenon. So she's got this book of Sudoku that she pulls out of her bag and just sits and does it while she's been left on her own.
So were you part of an increasingly small crowd of Sudoku aficionados?
I was really big into it. I find it quite calming. It's a logical thing. It's not just that she has something to occupy her. This child has a logical brain. She likes to solve puzzles. She likes to give order to things. She's coded as being very clever, very organised, orderly, but even when order around her breaks down, it affects her. Again, it's that very difficult conversation that this topic that Coppola keeps bringing up, is that people with the most excessive privilege in the world are still not happy people. That all the wealth and all the mobility and all the beauty and all the thinness and all the nice clothes and all the lovely hair, being able to travel, I mean, all of those things, if your parents are train wrecks in their own life and that's affecting you as an 11-year-old and you've no control over that, it's not that fun. And it's difficult because if you come from any other kind of background, any less of a privilege than that, then it's difficult to empathise fully.
I'm just looking back through all 6 of these films. Coppola seems to concentrate on what it's like to be a teenager. Or at least he seems to concentrate on what it's like to be in a position of girlhood. And yet in this film, the main point of view is that of Johnny. We get some implied point of view stuff about Cleo, but it's definitely not a film where Cleo is the main character. She's not there for the first few minutes, and she's absent for the last 10 or so minutes as well. So she disappears from this story in which she's quite a significant character, so she's clearly not the principal point of view character. In that respect, it's a bit unlike the other Coppola films, because a lot of Lost in Translation, actually most of Lost in Translation, is from Charlotte's point of view. Virgin Suicides, there's a lot of the world from the point of view of these girls, even though we don't get to hear what's going on in their inner psychological landscape. Bling Ring, Beguiled, Marie Antoinette, all from the viewpoint of teenagers. Oh, I suppose, even in Beguiled... No, actually, the film doesn't start off with the male character, does it? It starts off with one of the girls going out to pick some mushrooms,
and she finds him.
Yeah. This is unusual in devoting quite a lot of its attention to the outlook on life of an adult man. But clearly the thing that adult man is missing in his life is a meaningful relationship with a girl. An actual girl.
When he was on the phone towards the end, he was breaking down to his regular person, asking her to come over. It seemed like he wasn't asking her to come over necessarily for sex. He needed company, he needed affection, attachment to something. And I was thinking, he doesn't realise that what he really needs is his daughter. He misses her, and it's not clear that he recognises that that's who he's missing, that's who he's trying to fill the gap with. There's this void because he has a really good relationship with his daughter. It's quite an effortless relationship, mostly because she is so mature and self-entertaining.
It made it a bit of a surprise to find that what he was doing at the end of the film was just striking out into the desert, because I thought he was going off to go and spend some time with her.
It's more a symbolic thing, I think, because the film begins with him driving in circles and it ends with him walking forward and leaving that behind.
And it's spending the time with her which has enabled that.
Yeah.
So there's an implicit acknowledgement of the value of that relationship in that ending. This is a good piece of work, I think.
Yeah, really solid film. I think that's probably my favourite of the 6.
My student did say that Somewhere was quite special.
I don't know if it's because I'm tired and it's been a long day, but I did feel the time passing with it. But we are used to things just moving much faster, and Coppola's films aren't slow cinema, but they are much slower than conventional film now. So they are something in between slow cinema and conventional cinema.
What number is this if we're counting podcasts in which you and I have had a really tired, yawny chat? Let's not do it past 9 o'clock at night next time.
Well, it's difficult because we're working all day, and then by the time we watch the film, it's usually after 8 or 9.
I'm going to give myself a plug here. I have done something I rarely do, which is I've watched the entire corpus of films of a director, and I've watched
films.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, because she's actually made about the same amount again of shorts. Okay, I watched the entire feature film output of a director, not counting La Traviata because that's a film of an opera.
That's a live thing, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That's not quite the same.
Okay, so I've watched the entire feature film output of a certain director, and I have watched a body of work which a student of mine is working on, only because the student is working on it. Well, primarily, I also watched it because I wanted to watch Coppola films for a while. Primarily because that student was writing on it. I've done stuff like this before where I had a student writing on one film for a 5,000 word essay, and I'd never seen the film before, and it was the essay that they were specifically assigned to me to develop over the course of an entire semester. Yeah, in that situation I've watched the film, but never gone out and watched the entire feature film output of a director.
Have you seen I Shot Andy Warhol?
No.
Oh, right. Because I was going to say you might have seen all of Mary Harron's films, but you haven't.
I'm sure there's one or two other directors out there whose entire output I have seen, but at the moment the only one I can be sure of is Ms. Coppola. And ironically, no, not ironically, completely appositely, the piece of writing that the student wrote on Coppola's films, I'm finally getting around to marking the day after tomorrow. So I'm actually finally equipped to mark this thing, which I now have to mark.
Some other things of note, I think, for the film. There's a really nice static shot. It's quite a long static take with Cleo and Johnny, and the guy seems to be his brother, her uncle, all sitting on the sofa, and they're talking about stuff. The whole time Stephen Dorff is removing the cast for real on his arm. He's cutting it off and ripping it off, and it's all real and it's all in one take. Interestingly as well, like there's so much that is performed for real in front of the camera. The camera's static, or there's no cutting, at least in the likes of the pole dancing, the ice skating, the guitar playing. The guy playing the guitar and singing is all live, it looked as well.
Yeah.
But Johnny / Stephen Dorff is not actually playing the piano in the bit where we find he can play the piano, because the shot is so that his hands are obscured and we can't see the keys. Right. He's not really playing it.
Sophia lied to us.
Because Stephen Dorff, presumably, if he can play the piano, is not as accomplished as the character is.
That shot in which we can see him playing the piano and Cleo's just curled up in the chair behind him.
Yes.
A big comfy chair. That was one of the more indicative shots of this restraint about getting cameras up in people's faces.
Yeah.
I'm going to stand back. So far I'm in the next room camera position.
Because it's their space.
To provide a revealing comparison, my colleague Tina tells me that when she's filming, she always finds herself standing behind her own camera operator and physically pushing him closer to subject. And having seen only one of her films now, but having seen it twice, she loves to get cameras right up in people's grills. There's multiple spectrums we can draw for directors, and on the spectrum of how close to one's characters, directors like to get their cameras. Sofia Coppola is at the distant end of that spectrum, isn't she? I can't think of any director who's significantly further away from their characters on average.
I would say if you go to Ozu, Yasuhiro Ozu, and maybe even the likes of Roberto Rossellini, where the camera's just sitting back and very domestic, banal things are happening. A deep focus shot where everything is in clear view and it's up to you for your eyes to wander around and decide what you want to look at. For me, this was communicating. This is just them being themselves in this space. We're outsiders, we're looking in on this, we're not getting too close because it's a private moment, but also it's one of the many examples in Somewhere of non-verbal communication and non-verbal bonding between father and daughter, where they've got this comfort with him just playing at the piano and she's just curled up listening, or not long before that where the guy who seems to work at the hotel where he's living, the song seems to be called something along the lines, or at least there was a line of "I just want to be your teddy bear." He's playing the guitar and singing to them, and it's a very intimate moment in quite a big public space with not that many people in, and they're quite peripheral to everybody else who's around. They've just got this little cocoon in open space, you know, and they curl up on the sofa together and they're enjoying it and they appreciate the performance, and it's very special. And the guy's not doing it for money, he's doing it for pleasure.
So today's essay title is Sofia Coppola is a neo-realist filmmaker. Discuss. Because it seems that there are little elements there of wanting to be a documentarian in one's fiction.
Well, there's a blurring, because every film is a documentary, every documentary is fiction.
And on that bombshell.
Thanks for listening, and thanks for all shares on social media and support on Patreon. It all makes a really big difference in getting the word out and making the podcast more widely accessible. Do join us next week. The themes of girlhood and teenage girldom and fandom and that kind of thing, they're all going to pull through into next week, and I've got a different co-pilot, so I really hope you'll enjoy listening to Christy Smith with me next week. Until then, take care.